when the great signal ran from heaven to hell, about 10 million times the distance reckoned from our sun to its earth, as we can tell how much time it takes up, even to a second, for every ray that travels to dispel the fogs of London, through which, dimly beaconed, the weathercocks are gilt some thrice a year, if that the summer is not too severe. I say that I can tell, 'twas half a minute. I know the solar beams take up more time, ere packed up for their journey they begin it, but then their telegraph is less sublime, and if they ran a race, they would not win it against Satan's couriers bound for their own clime. The sun takes up some years for every ray to reach its goal, the devil not half a day. Upon the verge of space, about the size of half a crown, a little speck appeared. I've seen a something like it in the skies in the Aegean ere a squall. It neared, and, growing bigger, took another guise. Like an aerial ship it tacked and steered, or was steered. I am doubtful of the grammar of the last phrase, which makes the stanza stammer. But take your choice. And then it grew a cloud, and so it was, a cloud of witnesses. But such a cloud! No land e'er saw a crowd of locusts numerous as the heavens saw these. They shadowed with their myriads space. Their loud and varied cries were like those of wild geese, if nations may be likened to a goose, and realized the phrase of hell broke loose. Here crashed a sturdy oath of stout John Bull, who damned away his eyes as heretofore. There Paddy brogued, "By Jesus!" "Was ye well?" the Scot exclaimed. The French ghost bore in certain terms late in full, as the first coachman will, and midst the roar, the voice of Jonathan was heard to express, "Our president is going to war, I guess." Besides, there were the Spaniard, Dutch, and Dane. In short, an universal shoal of shades, from Otaheite's Isle to Salisbury Plain, of all climes and professions, years and trades, ready to swear against the good king's reign, bitter as clubs in cards are against spades, all summoned by this grand subpoena to try if kings mayn't be damned like me or you. When Michael saw this host, he first grew pale, as angels can. Next, like Italian twilight, he turned all colours, as a peacock's tail, sunset streaming through a Gothic skylight in some old abbey, or a trout not stale, or distant lightning on the horizon by night, or a fresh rainbow, or a grand review of 30 regiments in red, green, and blue. Then he addressed himself to Satan. "Why, my good old friend, for such I deem you, though our different parties make us fight so shy, I ne'er mistake you for a personal foe. Our difference is political, and I trust that, whatever may occur below, you know my great respect for you, and this makes me regret whate'er you do amiss. Why, my dear Lucifer, would you abuse my call for witnesses? I did not mean that you should half of earth and hell produce. 'Tis even superfluous, since 2 honest, clean, true testimonies are enough. We lose our time, nay, our eternity, between the accusation and defence. If we hear both, 'twill stretch our immortality." Satan replied, "To me the matter is indifferent in a personal point of view. I can have 50 better souls than this with far less trouble than we have gone through already, and I merely argued his late Majesty of Britain's case with you upon a point of form, enough below, God knows." Thus spoke the demon, late called multi-faced by Multo's scribbling Southey. "Then we'll call 1 or 2 persons of the myriads placed around our Congress, and dispense with all the rest," quoth Michael. "Who may be so graced as to speak first? There's choice enough. Who shall it be?" Then Satan answered, "There are many, but you may choose Jack Wilkes as well as any." A merry, cock-eyed, curious-looking sprite upon the instant started from the throng, dressed in a fashion now forgotten quite, for all the fashions of the flesh stick long by people in the next world, where unite all the costumes since Adam's, right or wrong, from Eve's fig leaf down to the petticoat, almost as scanty, of days less remote. The spirit looked around upon the crowds assembled and exclaimed, "My friends of all the spheres, we shall catch cold amongst these clouds, so let's to business. Why this general call? If those are freeholders I see in shrouds, and 'tis for an election that they bawl, behold a candidate with unturned coat, St. Peter. May I count upon your vote? Sir, replied Michael, you mistake. These things are of a former life, and what we do above is more august. To judge of kings is the tribunal met, so now you know. Then I presume those gentlemen with wings, said Wilkes, are cherubs, and that soul below looks much like George III, but to my mind, a good deal older. Bless me, is he blind? He is what you behold him, and his doom depends upon his deeds, the angel said. If you have aught to arraign in him, the tomb gives license to the humblest beggar's head to lift itself against the loftiest. Some, said Wilkes, don't wait to see them laid in lead for such a liberty, and I, for one, have told them what I thought beneath the sun. Above the sun, repeat then what thou hast to urge against him, said the archangel. Why, replied the spirit, since old scores are past, must I turn evidence? In faith, not I. Besides, I beat him hollow at the last, with all his lords and commons. In the sky I don't like ripping up old stories, since his conduct was but natural in a prince. Foolish, no doubt, and wicked to oppress a poor unlucky devil without a shilling, but then I blame the man himself much less than Bute and Grafton, and shall be unwilling to see him punished here for their excess, since they were both damned long ago, and still in their place below. For me I have forgiven, and vote his habeas corpus into heaven. Wilkes, said the devil, I understand all this. You turned to half a courtier ere you died, and seem to think it would not be amiss to grow a whole one on the other side of Charon's ferry. You forget that his reign is concluded. Whatsoe'er betide, he won't be sovereign more. You've lost your labour, for at the best he will but be your neighbour. However, I knew what to think of it, when I beheld you in your jesting way, flitting and whispering round about the spit where Belial, upon duty for the day, with fox's lard was basting William Pitt, his pupil. I knew what to think. I say, that fellow even in hell breeds farther ills. I'll have him gagged, was one of his own bills. Call Junius. From the crowd a shadow stalked, and at the name there was a general squeeze, so that the very ghosts no longer walked in comfort at their own aerial ease, but were all rammed and jammed, but to be balked, as we shall see, and jostled hands and knees, like wind compressed and pent within a bladder, or like a human colic, which is sadder. The shadow came, a tall, thin, grey-haired figure, that looked as it had been a shade on earth, quick in its motions, with an air of vigour, but naught to mark its breeding or its birth. Now it waxed little, then again grew bigger, with now an air of gloom or savage mirth. But as you gazed upon its features, they changed every instant to what, none could say. The more intently the ghosts gazed, the less could they distinguish whose the features were. The devil himself seemed puzzled even to guess. They varied like a dream, now here, now there. And several people swore from out the press they knew him perfectly, and one could swear he was his father, upon which another was sure he was his mother's cousin's brother. Another that he was a duke or knight, an orator, a lawyer, or a priest, a nabob, a man midwife. But the white mysterious changed his countenance at least as oft as they their minds. Though in full sight he stood, the puzzle only was increased. The man was a phantasmagoria. In himself he was so volatile and thin. The moment that you had pronounced him one, presto, his face changed, and he was another. And when that change was hardly well put on, it varied till I don't think his own mother, if that he had a mother, would her son have known, he shifted so from one to t'other, till guessing from a pleasure grew a task, at this epistolary iron mask. For sometimes he like Cerberus would seem, 3 gentlemen at once, as sagely says good Mrs. Malaprop. Then you might deem that he was not even one. Now many rays were flashing round him, and now a thick steam hid him from sight, like fogs on London days. Now Burke, now Tooke, he grew to people's fancies, and certes often like Sir Philip Francis. I've an hypothesis, 'tis quite my own. I've never let it out till now for fear of doing people harm about the throne, and injuring some minister or peer, on whom the stigma might perhaps be blown. It is, my gentle public, lend thine ear, 'tis that what Junius we are wont to call was really, truly, nobody at all. I don't see wherefore letters should not be written without hands, since we daily view them written without heads, and books, we see, are filled as well without the latter too. And really, till we fix on somebody for certain sure to claim them as his due, their author, like the Niger's mouth, will bother the world to say if there be mouth or author. And who and what art thou? The archangel said. For that you may consult my title page, replied this mighty shadow of a shade. If I have kept my secret half an age, I scarce shall tell it now. Canst thou upbraid, continued Michael, George Rex, or allege aught further? Junius answered, You had better first ask him for his answer to my letter. My charges upon record will outlast the brass of both his epitaph and tomb. Repent'st thou not, said Michael, of some past exaggeration, something which may doom thyself if false, at him if true? Thou wast too bitter, is it not so, in thy gloom of passion? Passion? Cried the phantom dim. I loved my country, and I hated him. What I have written, I have written. Let the rest be on his head or mine. So spoke old Nominus Umbra, and while speaking yet, away he melted in celestial smoke. Then Satan said to Michael, Don't forget to call George Washington and John Horne Tooke and Franklin. But at this time there was heard a cry for room, though not a phantom stirred. At length, with jostling, elbowing, and the aid of cherubim appointed to that post, the devil Asmodeus to the circle made his way, and looked as if his journey cost some trouble. When his burden down he laid, What's this? Cried Michael. Why, 'tis not a ghost. I know it, quoth the incubus, but he shall be one, if you leave the affair to me. Confound the renegado! I have sprained my left wing, he's so heavy. One would think some of his works about his neck were chained. But to the point. While hovering o'er the brink of Skiddaw, where as usual it still rained, I saw a taper, far below me, wink, and stooping, caught this fellow at a libel, no less on history than the Holy Bible. The former is the devil's scripture, and the latter yours, good Michael, so the affair belongs to all of us, you understand. I snatched him just as you see him there, and brought him off for sentence out of hand. I've scarcely been 10 minutes in the air. At least a quarter it can hardly be. I dare say that his wife is still at tea. Here Satan said, I know this man of old, and have expected him for some time here. A sillier fellow you will scarce behold, or more conceited in his petty sphere. But surely it was not worth while to fold such trash below your wing, Asmodeus dear. We had the poor wretch safe, without being bored with carriage, coming of his own accord. But since he's here, let's see what he has done. Done? Cried Asmodeus. He anticipates the very business you are now upon, and scribbles as if head clerk to the fates. Who knows to what his ribaldry may run, when such an ass as this, like Balaam's, prates? Let's hear, quoth Michael, what he has to say. You know we're bound to that in every way. Now the bard, glad to get an audience, which by no means often was his case below, began to cough and hawk and hem and pitch his voice into that awful note of woe to all unhappy hearers within reach of poets when the tide of rhymes in flow. But stuck fast with his first hexameter, not one of all whose gouty feet would stir. But ere the spavined dactyls could be spurred into recitative, in great dismay both cherubim and seraphim were heard to murmur loudly through their long array. And Michael rose, ere he could get a word, of all his founded verses under way, and cried, For God's sake, stop, my friend! 'Twere best, non di, non homines, you know the rest. A general bustle spread throughout the throng, which seemed to hold all verse in detestation. The angels had of course enough of song, when upon service, and the generation of ghosts had heard too much in life, not long before, to profit by a new occasion. The monarch, mute till then, exclaimed, What? What? Pie, come again. No more of that. The tumult grew. An universal cough convulsed the skies, as during a debate, when Castlereagh has been up long enough, before he was first Minister of State. I mean, the slaves here now. Some cried, "Off, off," as at a farce, till, grown quite desperate, the bard St. Peter prayed to interpose, himself an author, only for his prose. The varlet was not an ill-favoured knave, a good deal like a vulture in the face, with a hooked nose and a hawk's eye, which gave a smart and sharper-looking sort of grace to his whole aspect, which, though rather grave, was by no means so ugly as his case. But that, indeed, was hopeless as can be, quite a poetic felony, they see. Then Michael blew his trump, and stilled the noise with one still greater, as is yet the mode on earth besides, except some grumbling voice, which now and then will make a slight inroad upon decorous silence. Few will twice lift up their lungs when fully overcrowed, and now the bard could plead his own bad cause with all the attitudes of self-applause. He said, I only give the heads, he said he meant no harm in scribbling. 'Twas his way upon all topics. 'Twas besides his bread, of which he buttered both sides. 'Twould delay too long the assembly he was pleased to dread, and take up rather more time than a day to name his works. He would cite but a few. Wat Tyler, rhymes on Blenheim, Waterloo. He had written praises of regicide, he had written praises of all kings whatever. He had written for republics far and wide, and then against them bitterer than ever. For Pantisocracy he once had cried aloud a scheme less moral than 'twas clever, then grew a hearty anti-Jacobin, had turned his coat, and would have turned his skin. He had sung against all battles, and again in their high praise and glory. He had called reviewing the ungentle craft, and then become as base a critic as e'er crawled, fed, paid, and pampered by the very men by whom his muse and morals had been mauled. He had written much blank verse, and banker prose, and more of both than anybody knows. He had written Wesley's life, here turning round to Satan, Sir, I'm ready to write yours, in 2 octavo volumes, nicely bound, with notes and preface, all that most allures the pious purchaser, and there's no ground for fear, for I can choose my own reviewers. So let me have the proper documents, that I may add you to my other saints. Satan bowed and was silent. Well, if you, with amiable modesty, decline my offer, what says Michael? There are few whose memoirs could be rendered more divine. Mine is a pen of all work, not so new as it was once, but I would make you shine like your own trumpet. By the way, my own has more of brass in it, and is as well blown. But talking about trumpets, here's my vision. Now you shall judge, all people, yes you shall, judge with my judgment, and by my decision be guided who shall enter heaven or fall. I settle all these things by intuition, times present, past, to come, heaven, hell, and all, like King Alfonso. When I thus see double, I save the deity some worlds of trouble. He ceased, and drew forth an MS, and no persuasion on the part of devils, saints, or angels now could stop the torrent. So he read the first 3 lines of the contents, but at the 4th, the whole spiritual show had vanished with variety of scents, ambrosial and sulphurous, as they sprang like lightning off from his melodious twang. Those grand heroics acted as a spell. The angels stopped their ears and plied their pinions. The devils ran howling, deafened down to hell. The ghosts fled, gibbering for their own dominions. For 'tis not yet decided where they dwell, and I leave every man to his opinions. Michael took refuge in his trump, but lo, his teeth were set on edge. He could not blow. St. Peter, who has hitherto been known for an impetuous saint, upraised his keys, and at the 5th line knocked the poet down, who fell like Phaeton, but more at ease, into his lake, for there he did not drown. A different web being by the destinies woven for the laureate's final wreath, whene'er reform shall happen either here or there. He first sank to the bottom, like his works, but soon rose to the surface like himself. For all corrupted things are buoyed like corks by their own rottenness, light as an elf, or wisp that flits o'er a morass. He lurks, it may be, still, like dull books on a shelf, in his own den to scrawl some life or vision, as Wellborn says, the devil turned precision. As for the rest, to come to the conclusion of this true dream, the telescope is gone which kept my optics free from all delusion, and showed me what I in my turn have shown. All I saw farther, in the last confusion, was that King George slipped into heaven for one, and when the tumult dwindled to a calm, I left him practising the 100th Psalm.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to this HarperCollins audiobook. If you'd like to receive a HarperCollins catalogue, please call 0181 307 4052. That's 0181 307 4052. Or send your request to HarperCollins Audiobooks Mail Order Department, Free Post GW 3834, Glasgow G4 OBR. That's Free Post GW 3834, Glasgow G4 OBR.